They told me grief comes in waves. What they didn't tell me is that grief can be surgical, precise, cold, and slow enough to learn every contour of the wound before you close it. My name is Anna Kovac. 6 months ago my life looked like the soft focus of a portrait. Mark and I smiling on the canals, my promotion at the gallery, an apartment that smelled like coffee and rain. Then I found the photo. It was one of those stupid, careless things. A thumbnail on his phone of him kissing someone at a rooftop bar. Not some furtive glance, but a mouth pressed to a mouth the way I knew his. Her hair was black and slick with city lights, and her face was turned away, but the thread of her halo, a scrap of silver necklace, matched the box he kept on the top shelf. The image pressed into me like a physical blow. I remember where I was. The couch, the green throw he hated, the sound of rain like applause outside the window. I did not cry. Not then. I simply became very small and very precise. People expect fury first. Shouting, smashing, a storm. I tried that. I confronted him with the photo 1 week later, in the kitchen while the kettle screamed. Mark blinked, then smiled that half-apology smile he always used for my baking mishaps. He said it meant nothing, the line of men who have told me versions of that before. He said the truest lie of all, that I was imagining things. He thought he could tidy affection into a drawer and close it. He underestimated the thing he had broken. Revenge is not a single act. It's a language you must learn. I started with silence. I listened to him. I catalogued his patterns. Mark worked late at the consultancy, drank too much on Wednesdays, texted in a language of abbreviations and emojis. He loved jazz records, a photograph of his father on the mantel, and an old wristwatch he thought made him look official. Elena, the woman in the photo, liked opulent things, heeding the glow of a polished life. She was freelance, or so his messages claimed. I dug through what I could without being obvious. Open-source traces of her through the sliver of a name, a shared friend at a charity gala. I learned what she ate, where she drank, and how she walked. It would have been easy to burn him, theatrically. A video sent to the gallery director. A confrontation in front of his clients. But cruelty is not always cathartic. Cruelty can be sloppy. I wanted him to feel every inch of the fall, professional, social, visceral, so that the weight of it would teach him what his thoughtless mouth hadn't. My plan took the shape of an intimacy. Becoming a woman he would underestimate. I let him think I was bruised and spent. I let him come closer, because he did not expect to discover a shop or instrument there. I began a small campaign of adjustments. Small lies that tasted like truth. A false confession here, I've been seeing someone, to test his reaction. A fabricated conversation with a supposed friend there, planted like breadcrumbs. I never shouted. I smiled dinners into the true late nights he kept. I learned to make my silence heavy with implication. If revenge is a map, mine had coordinates in Mark's pride. He had built his identity on being right, on being the organized spine to my uncertain flail. So I turned that spine into a lattice. First, his work. I quietly fostered a relationship with Lena, the administrative assistant at his consultancy. Not because she was a key, but because she had access to small things. Invites, calendars, the rumor pipeline. I was friend, that modern hybrid of acquaintance and observer. Lena liked gossip the way people like sugar. She craved the drama Mark didn't think I could cultivate. I fed her plausible stories, improvised hints about Mark's distraction, subtle mentions of a woman with dark hair. I spoke with the practiced innocence of someone leaning over for a recipe. At the same time I cultivated Elena. Not openly, of course. I followed her online in the minimal way that doesn't look like stalking. The occasional like, a comment about a photo of a seaside cafe, a private message that complimented an artwork she had posted. She replied. Flattered. Guarded. She told me in one of those late, candid threads that she liked the kind of men who were good with words, and how she admired people who could make a life look like it had been edited. That word, edited, caught me. My whole life had been carefully edited to present a palatable version of myself. Polished floors, curated friends, stable employment. I'd allowed myself to be the version of Anna that was easy to love. It turned out the unsung edges of who I was would be my advantage. Where they were presentational, I became substantive. You need allies for precision. I reached for them not out of revenge but for accuracy. I took a week off and enrolled in a short course on digital forensics offered by a local college. Not to become a hacker. I had no interest in breaking into accounts, but to understand how footprints are left and traced. I learned how to read metadata, identify timestamps, and understand the limitations of so-called private messages. I learned how narratives self-assemble from small data points, the same way rumors do. Then I built the stage. It was brilliant in its smallness. A charity fundraiser Mark was speaking at, his colleagues present, clients humming like an audience. I arranged to be there with a friend named Mira. She owed me one because I had once covered for her when she missed a deadline. We arrived late, as if by accident. Mark looked relieved to see me. He called me later, the calm you bring. The trust he had in my predictability was the scaffold I used to climb. A week before the fundraiser, I sent a message from an anonymous account to the consultancy's management. I have evidence Mark Dalton is unprofessional and compromising client work. Call me. The email was vague, credible, and timed to the week when budgets were tight and reputations fragile. I knew how companies reacted. An internal inquiry, a cooling of opportunities. It was bureaucratic. It was slow. It was perfect. I did not send evidence, because those would move the matter into legal territory. I only planted suspicion. At the fundraiser, Mark's introduction was clipped. He smiled too often, as if the world required him to. His colleagues asked questions in measured tones. I watched the way he moved under scrutiny like a creature in a glass jar. After his speech, I slipped a set of photographs. Prints I had obtained with legal means, a rooftop kiss that was not the thumbnail but a different night, a black cocktail dress that matched the necklace, into an envelope addressed to one of his senior partners. I left the envelope in the cloakroom, where people were careless about confidentiality. It was an act of middle-class sabotage. Plausible deniability wrapped in a neat paper sleeve. The ripple was predictable. A quiet meeting followed. An HR inquiry followed that. Mark's client list was stalled while they looked into unrelated matters. He thought the worst was a hiccup. Men like him always did. They mistake inconvenience for consequence. But the real chess move was social, not professional. Reputation lives in gossip. I needed to make him radioactive. So I became the friend Elena never knew she had. I invited her to a book launch at my gallery. A perfectly innocent request. She said yes. She arrived with that same silver necklace flashing like a clasp in her life. We talked about art. She admired a painting and told me about her past in a soft, lyrical way that made me ache. She liked men who could be layers, she said. I let her. Then, one night at my apartment, after 2 glasses of wine and the kind of talk that pretends to be confessional, I said, "You and Mark, how long has this been going on?" Her face shifted in that small way that tells you a person is balancing evidence against denial. She told me, because people always tell the truth to those they think cannot judge them. She spoke of weekends, of secret messages, of being told they were 2 people who had found something. The vocabulary of lovers. She didn't know I had the photos. She didn't know I had the message I had sent to HR. She did not suspect the quiet machine being wound in my chest. I did not confront her. I didn't have to. Instead, I listened and made myself a confidant. I learned the time she frequented a particular bar, the colleague she met, the friend who introduced her to Mark. I watched how she curated her life. Like 2 people arranging vases on a mantel. I took to leaving small anonymous notes in places she would find them. A single line of poetry tucked into a book at the cafe she loved. A photograph slid under the door of the studio where she taught. The notes were not threats. They were careful reminders that someone knew. Elena panicked. She stopped sleeping well. She started texting Mark in the middle of the night, asking him to end it. He didn't end it. Men told both women they were complicated, which is sometimes a euphemism for cowardice. Then came the reveal. Not one sensational moment but a cascade. It started with an article in a small industry newsletter, a whisper about conduct concerns at the consultancy. People began to distance themselves. Mark's speaking engagements evaporated. Clients received clarifying memos from HR. His father called him to ask, in a voice like a cracked bell, if everything was all right. His world contracted to the size of a few pitiless phone calls. People asked me questions with the soft curiosity of vultures. "Did you know?" Friends would say, eyes flicking. I lied. I said I hadn't. I let him imagine I was devastated while I watched him methodically lose the things he thought made him unassailable. The last act had to be public but intimate. I could have sent the photographs to his mother, to his colleagues, to the whole company. I could have recorded a confession. What I did instead was craft a scene that would force him to choose an audience and then reveal his choice as cowardice. One afternoon I texted Elena from a burner number. "Meet me on the terrace of the Botanica at 6. Alone." She came, eyes wide, hair tucked into a scarf like a flag. I wore his old sweater because I knew he loved it. Wearing it felt like wearing the memory of him. I knew she would recognize it immediately, that it would be a small provocation. I brought a small book of poems, and inside I had left a Polaroid, a picture of Elena and Mark laughing on a different rooftop. She saw it, then looked up at me with something like fury, like relief. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because he taught me how to be ordinary," I said. "And ordinary answers won't do." I had arranged for Mark to be at the Botanica. Not for a confrontation, he's not worth the cliché, but because I wanted him to witness the unraveling. He came because he thought urgent drama could be quarantined with humor. He expected to deflect, to joke, to be forgiven. Instead, I let him listen to what Elena and I said. Not accusations but small, precise truths. I read passages from the book I had brought, lines about self-deception and the small deaths of complacency. Elena cried a little. Mark's hands shook. Then, without raising my voice, I slid a USB drive across the table to the person from HR who happened to be there. A coincidence, I told him later. On it were timestamps, emails, clipped messages I'd compiled that showed his pattern of behavior. Lies, evasions, the corporate-friendly phrasing he used to sanitize what he'd done. It was not illegal evidence. It was a narrative assembled out of truth. What broke him was not the photographs. He'd assumed photographs could be explained, but the certainty that his curated life had become legible to others. He made a small, clumsy attempt to salvage himself with humor, to charm the HR representative, and the HR representative, trained to keep distance, kept it. The consultancy issued a statement about an ongoing inquiry. Friends asked questions and received non-committal answers. His father stopped returning his calls. I won because I had built a world in which he could not fix the narrative. The last image I gave him was the thing he couldn't spin. A text I sent to everyone who had mattered in his life. "Mark and Elena have been involved in an affair." I used neutral channels, nothing libelous, but the effect was complete. People chose sides. People measure their social capital, and Mark found his measured out in dwindling coins. After it was over, there was a silence that felt like water standing still. Elena left the city within a month. I learned she had moved to Lisbon or Bergen. Rumors swirl like gulls. Mark attempted to rebuild. He took a consulting job in a smaller firm and avoided me at the few social events where we had mutual acquaintances. He sent me one message months later. An apology dressed in hypothetical regret. I read it and set the phone down. The apology contained no learning, only a desire to be permitted to resume. I did not reply. The victory tasted quieter than I had imagined. There was no triumphant dance, no dramatic declaration. What I felt was a steadying of the room inside me. I had reclaimed the edges they thought were frayed. I had taken apart the comfortable myth he told himself and left him to live with a jagged result. But revenge, I discovered, is not an end so much as a clarification. It says, this is where the line is. This is what I will not accept. People ask if I felt guilt. Sometimes late at night I do. Not for the exposure itself, but for the slow, inevitable collateral damage when lives are rearranged. When you rearrange someone's life, you find shards of other people's things in the corners. Friendships, loyalties, quiet routines. I am not untroubled by this. I am simply resolute. The choice Mark made did not belong to me to fix. Now, months afterward, I have a new routine. I teach occasional seminars on curation and authenticity at the gallery. I travel when I want, not where someone else wants me to go. On mornings when the city is still, I walk along the river and listen to the water edit itself against the stone. Sometimes I pass places where Mark and I had been, and the memory is a photograph I can look at without flinching. I carry a small object he once left behind, a watch he no longer wears, in a drawer like a fossil. If there is a moral, it is this. Some people believe love is the only honest currency. I disagree. Honesty is a currency, but it must be used. You can forgive a betrayal, perhaps. Or you can transform it into a lesson that keeps you alive. I chose the latter. When I think about what I taught myself through that slow, surgical undoing, I think of the last line in the book I used at Botanica. It said, simply, "We are not the versions we inherit." I wrote beneath it in a small, neat hand, "We are the versions we insist upon becoming." Then I closed the book and walked away.